Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructive Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at puremtgo.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructiveCriticism.com.
Hello everybody, and welcome to episode 145 of the Common Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host Christian, and I'm joined by our co-host Brad.
Hello everybody.
Before we get too far into this episode, I just want to remind everyone that Common Knowledge and all of the podcasts on the Constructive Criticism Network are sponsored by puremtgo.com. If you would like to support the show, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel. And check out the Common Knowledge Patreon, where you can find Brad's weekly solo show, This Week in Pauper, along with my league videos. With that out of the way, let's get on with the podcast for the week.
All right. How you doing, buddy?
Man, I'm doing great. How are you?
Pretty good. It's a nice weekend. I haven't really done much. I did the, what we're going to talk about, I did the tournament on Friday. But really, this weekend, just been kind of getting ready for Christmas, getting plans scheduled, organized, last-minute details, yada, 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 last-minute decorations, meal preps, you know, that kind of thing. What about you?
Yeah, no, I've been, I guess, not too busy. Took my daughter to see Santa.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Does she like Santa or is she a crier?
She didn't, cry, but she was definitely nervous at first. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, our mall Santa is, top tier mall Santa.
Really?
Yeah, he got down on his knees. He had a storybook that he starts reading to her. And ultimately, right, I understand what it is. At the end of the day, he's a salesperson.
Right.
And he's if this kid doesn't stop crying, I don't get my picture. Therefore, we don't turn a profit. But he was a very good salesperson.
Yeah, I always figured Santa was a good salesperson.
Yeah, probably.
Got to be very charismatic.
Be careful not to say what I said last year about Santa.
You guys can check out previous episodes for that comment.
Oh, yeah. What have you been into as far as playing Pauper? Was it just the event and the deck that you played in it?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. I got some time off, some PTO to burn before the end of the year. So I decided to take a half a day on Friday and get in this free event. It was pretty sweet. But yeah, that was all I really played. Prepped a little bit during the week here and there, played a few games. But yeah, I haven't really been back online since Friday afternoon. What about you?
I haven't gotten to play as much with work and, taking Harper to see Santa and stuff like that.
Sure.
But I've played a few leagues with Reckless Burn. I think the deck is still strong, still just tweaking the deck list. I think all the changes are basically meaningless because most of the cards do the same thing. But there are a few slight differences that make me believe that there's probably a best list out there. Whether or not I'm smart enough to get there, I have no idea.
No, I think you can get it. So yeah, you're still having success with it then? It wasn't just a one-off, lucky shot with your 5-0?
Yeah, I think the deck is really good. It's really hard to evaluate matchups because I think even Burn's bad matchups, if you have, if you play well and you make the right decisions, you can beat those bad matchups. Especially because a lot of the bad matchups that Burn has that I think are truly bad are decks that can also lose to themselves. So I'm thinking Boggles is, to me, a pretty bad matchup, but that's a deck that can lose to itself. Cycling Storm, depending on their main deck, is not the best matchup, but that's a deck that loses to itself a lot.
Right.
So given that, I would put Mono White Heroic sort of in this vein too, is they can sometimes be a little bit faster than you, but they lose to themselves a lot. And so when a lot of your bad matchups lose to themselves a lot, it means that as long as you can leverage your play skill and win one game that you're not supposed to, usually you can get that game 3 just off of the fact that sometimes their deck doesn't function.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent way to put it. Yeah, and you hit those nails right on the head. Boggles, Heroic, I know that from playing Heroic plenty of times. Even to a certain extent, I think Burn, the traditional Burn, or even your version of Burn, Reckless Burn, as we've been calling it, as I found Friday, it can definitely lose to itself rather quickly. But yeah, Heroic's the same way. Boggles is the same way. Affinity used to be that way before it got all these new toys. Affinity as of 3 or 4 years ago, could easily mulligan really badly, lose to itself. that sort of thing.
Yeah, and one of the things too with something that I like about Burn, I guess is what I'm going to say, is like as far as like a deck that loses to itself, I think out of all the decks we listed, it's the one that's most likely to draw itself out of the loss, because a lot of the cards basically do the same thing. Whereas with like Boggles and Heroic and Former Affinity, you needed like combinations of cards to win.
Right.
A lot of times, right, you're like, man, if I could just not draw 4 lands in a row, I have a chance of winning.
Right.
And that's like much different than when you're like, man, I need a hexproof creature plus Armadillo Cloak plus Ethereal Armor and so on and so forth.
Right.
I guess we can just jump into it. How did the event go for you, man?
The event itself was a blast. I know I said it before. I probably said it a handful of times on the stream. I did end up streaming as much as I played my portion of the tournament anyway. I really think these player-run events are sort of, at least right now, and kind of always have been really, I guess, the backbone of our online community. They sort of satisfy your competitive urge, as well as, since many of them are free, you can get out there with a brew and try to make it successful without burning ticks. You can see how well you do against the field, and then maybe take it to a legitimate MTGO tournament, something like that. So the event itself was awesome. My performance was not awesome. It was not great, but it took Reckless Burn, and I don't know if you just want to hop right into how I performed, and then we can talk about sort of the meta, the results of the tournament itself. A lot of familiar names on there, familiar deck, but we can kind of go whatever direction you'd like to with it.
Yeah, absolutely. We can just jump into, kind of how your matches and games went, see if we can dig into a little bit. Like I said, I've personally been playing a lot of the deck, so I'd love to discover if maybe our thought process are the same about it, kind of what we would change going forward, because if I'm not mistaken, you basically just played the list that I sent you the night before or 2 nights before.
Yeah, I think I may have changed a Pyroblast in the sideboard for an Elemental Blast or something. I changed 1 or 2 sideboard cards, nothing major, just for stuff that I already owned instead of like borrowing them or buying them or whatever. But yeah, the main deck, at least the main deck, was identical.
Just kind of jump into it. Well, first, I guess, was the tournament an open deck list event?
Yeah, that was the first thing. I don't know if it was in the rules somewhere or if it was just implied or you're just supposed to know. I don't know, but you got MTG Melee open, and I've never used the site before, but I've heard plenty of good things about it. You have the site open, you're waiting for your pairing, and then as soon as the little automated voice comes on and says that your pairing has been found or the round has started or whatever, yeah, your opponent's deck pops right up. And I saw it, and I thought, I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to see, because this is honestly the first time I think I've ever even played in an open deck list tournament on any level, MTGO and paper, nothing, anything like that. So that was interesting, but I got to see that my first opponent, my first round, was going to be against Boggles. So I instantly knew that was going to be a problem. Just like you said, if Boggles doesn't lose to itself, it's a very bad matchup for Burn. The life gain alone will probably push you out of the game before your life total gets to 0 with that deck.
I guess with hindsight, the deck was open deck list just before we actually jump into the matches. Would that have changed anything about like the process leading up? So like, for example, for me, before I plan like a challenge or anything like that, I always make sure to have a sideboard guide written. And I think if there was an open deck list event, I would be a lot more thorough with my sideboard guide. Like if you have notes, like if I see this in their sideboard this way instead, would be kind of like how my preparation would go, I believe, within reason, of course.
Yeah, sure.
But
I don't really know. I guess I would have to play a few more of these types of events to really see if an open deck list tournament is beneficial or not. It seems to, a lot of the set championship tournaments on Arena seem to be open deck lists. So I don't know. I don't know if it's a personal preference or if it actually does make a difference somehow, because your decks are already submitted by the time you find, by the time the tournament starts, your decks are submitted. So there's not a lot you can do about it. I don't know how Arena works, but yeah, I'm sure it would have to change a percentage here or there. But like I said, I'd probably have to play in multiple of them to see exactly what differences I could make out of them personally.
Yeah, so with that out of the way, I know you said that your first match was against Boggles. Do you kind of want to break down how the first game went?
Yeah, it was terrible, but it was terrible on my part, completely my part. I had it's the first kind of big tournament I've played in a while, so I had some nerves going. It was the first time I had used MTG Melee, the first time, I've been in a player run event on MTGO in a while. So just overall some nerves, and I was streaming it, so I had that kind of stuff to think about. And I knew my opponent was on Boggles, but he hadn't checked in to his spot yet, or to the tournament yet, to that round on MTG Melee. So I had a few minutes to think about it, and I think they gave you like 10 minutes to check in before they give you a game loss or whatever. So I wasn't in a huge rush, but I got to kind of thinking about it, and between setting up the stream and chatting with people and talking to people on stream, I guess I forgot that I was playing against Boggles, but somehow in my head I knew that I was still playing against an aggro deck. So my very first hand, the first 7 cards I got were like Mountain, some burn spells, a Lava Runner, and 2 Searing Blaze. And I thought, well, hell yeah, these Searing Blaze are awesome against aggro decks. Boom, that's a snap keep right there. Well, needless to say, I got hosed in game 1 pretty badly.
Right.
So there's not much that can be said about that one. There wasn't anything I could do. I couldn't catch up. If it had been any other hand, I think I would have done okay. Game 2, I had good hands. I had a good opening 7. I think I may have mulliganed down to 6 possibly, but I had all spells. I was burning face. I was doing this. I was doing that. And Boggles just did what they do. I think it was turn 3 or 4, and they had a 15 power Ledge Walker coming at me with Armadillo Cloak on it, and that was it. That's all I could do.
Okay, so how did you end up sideboarding for Boggles? Like, do you remember like what cards you brought in or what cards you took out?
I brought in, I don't exactly remember what I took out. That's a good question. I think I did sideboard out, I think all but one of the Searing Blazes, because I wasn't sure if they were running Cartouche of Solidarity, because I hadn't seen it. But I thought, well, if they were running Cartouche, at least they got the token out. You know, I can still cast Searing Blaze if I have to, that sort of thing. I brought in Electricaries, and I brought in 2 Electricaries for the Overload, and I brought in 1 or 2 Fiery Cannonades as well. I never saw any of them because game 2 was over so fast. I didn't see any of them.
Assuming that you didn't play like Martyr or Bashes or anything in your sideboard, correct?
Correct.
So in my experience, that card is kind of like one of the bigger cards that kind of make or break it.
Okay.
Normally, I'll cut like either 3 or 4 Searing Blazes, bring in all my Martyrs, and pretty much like Electricary or whatever else that like technically could be removal.
Right.
But the Cannonade was definitely a good call if you were playing that over Martyr.
I think I did actually have Electricary in my hand, my opening hand, game 2. But by the time I could cast it, the power of the creatures coming at me were already bigger than 2 or bigger than 1 or whatever. So it was out of my hands from like turn 2 on.
So let's just, I guess, jump into match 2.
So you think against Boggles, that's the biggest thing there is your sideboard, your Martyr of Ashes. Because Burn doesn't really have a way to deal with Boggles directly.
Yeah, so I think so, right? It's pretty obvious that Searing Blood is not a good card. So it's like, what can we bring out that can serve the same purpose of what Searing Blood is, which is basically stopping what your opponent is doing, right?
Right.
Martyr, I think, is a big one. You know, it's really nice that Martyr can kind of go deep and really, like, kill some big guys, you know?
Right.
Because if you pay to sacrifice it, revealing 4 cards from your hand, you're dealing 4 damage, you're definitely removing that creature.
Right.
I think it usually comes down to sideboards, but like I said, at some point in game 1, 2, or 3, they're going to lose to themselves.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was hoping for. I was hoping to make it to a game 3 and just sort of see that Boggles doing Boggles thing, but in the wrong way.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, game 2, I saw that I was against Stompy. I felt pretty confident in the matchup there, at least based on past experiences. This one, I think game 1, I had to multi 5 to find my first land. It was a pretty rough day mana-wise. And then the game went on. I had 1 mountain in play, nothing but 2+ mana value spells in my hand. So by turn 4, I was actually discarding to hand size, because I hadn't actually cast a spell yet. After mulliganing to 5, that was pretty brutal. So by turn 4 or 5, if you haven't cast a single spell, Stompy's going to run over you. And they did. So there wasn't a whole lot I could do about that. Game 2, I did finally get to cast my first Reckless Impulse, and it is amazing. When you got Thermo Alchemist on the board, you start chaining together Reckless Impulses, and you're just pinging them to death. You're just blasting them to death. It's awesome. It feels really, really good. So I won that one, game 2, pretty handily. I don't remember my exact chain of spells, but I know I was casting 1 impulse off the next, and I was exiling lightning bolts and that sort of thing, all with, I think at one point I did have 2 alchemists on the board. So every spell I cast was just 2 extra damage, and it was over.
I agree. Impulse is really crazy. I think we actually talked before the tournament, maybe the night before, and I was kind of telling you that like the strength of impulse is whenever you impulse and hit impulse and then you impulse again.
Yep, that's exactly what I did. Yep, it was awesome. It felt really, really good.
Yeah. It's also just like whenever you're getting into the later stages or the mid stages of a game, right? It's just consistently your best top deck.
Yep.
I think that card's super insane.
Game 3, a lot of mana problems again. I don't exactly remember if I mulliganed. I think I did, but this was another one where I had one land in play the whole time. I had a couple creatures in my hand, but they were all alchemists or more expensive. And every spell in my hand was like Needle Drop and Skewer the Critics and, very Rift Bolt, stuff like that. That was very conditional burn spells that I couldn't just cast. So that screwed me because I knew that, Stompy's pretty much a creature burn deck as it is. They're trying to do the same thing, but with creatures. So if you can't race them to some sort of finish, then you're going to lose. So a little bit of rough mana, game 3, but variance is what it is, I guess.
And then I think after that you had a mirror match, right?
Yep, round 3 was my bye. That was my one victory. Woohoo! I took that happily, went and played some games with different decks in the tournament practice room. Took Slivers out for a spin and just wrecked everybody I faced in the tournament practice room, so maybe I should have played that. But no, that was fun. Yeah, and then I guess technically round 4, my third match of the day, I had a mirror match against MTG Brad, friend of the show, Mr. Pauper Rapper guy. He wasn't exactly a mirror. I guess he was just traditional burn, no reckless impulse. But for all intents and purposes, it was a mirror match. My first game, I had Gitu Lava Runner on turn 1. But the problem with that card is I didn't have 2 instants and or sorceries in my graveyard until turn 4. Once again, I was hitting mana troubles, and everything that I did keep was too expensive to cast for the mana I had in play. So that was rough. That was not pleasant. I don't remember if I mulliganed in game 1 or not. The game 2 was perfect again. Another one of those instances. This time I did bring in Firebrand Archers against him. I think I just wanted to mix up the deck a little bit. I wasn't sure if he was even playing creatures. I hadn't seen any to that point. But I brought in Firebrand Archers, and it was awesome. I think turn 1, I Chain Lightninged him. He couldn't return it, obviously. And then I cast a Firebrand Archers on turn 2. And then turn 3 was Lightning Bolt, Skewer, attack with Archers. I did like 14 damage in one turn on turn 3. That was fantastic. And then I top deck Lightning Bolt for Exacties and got him, as they say. So that was good. That was fun. I feel like that is what you're always looking for when you're playing Burn. I know it seems obvious, but those are the turns you want to have. Those are the ideal hands you want to have. And then game 3 was pretty much a slugfest. We just went back and forth with the creatures and with the spells. We were both at, I think he was at 6 or 7, and I was at 5 or 6. And then he just had that turn where he's just bolt fire blast or whatever it was, whatever sequence got me down to -2 or 3, and that was the end of my day.
Kind of having all that recapped, how do you feel about the deck? Do you think that there are any thought processes you want to talk about or anything like that? Maybe whether that be deck building or actually playing it, that you would reconsider having if you got a do-over?
I don't think so. The deck itself felt pretty good. Like I said, there was a lot of, maybe I don't mulligan very well. I have the same problem when I play Mono White Heroic specifically, because it runs the same 17 to 18 lands depending on which build you look at. And I'm constantly dying to myself, dying to mulligans, keeping bad hands, that sort of thing. I think maybe I just hadn't played this version of Burn enough or practiced with it enough to know what's good to keep and what you should instead start with or dig for if you're going to mulligan. I feel pretty good about the matchups themselves, what to bring in sideboard wise, what to look for, lines of action kind of playing out a turn or two in my head as opposed to what's on the board in front of me. So I think it's generally my opening hand is my biggest issues.
Good news is that's something that is easily improved by just playing more Magic.
Right.
But yeah, so now I guess we can transition into talking a little bit about the event overall. And I think they cut it top 4 in this event, right?
Yes, I believe so. That's correct.
The top 4 was actually really varied, and I think actually the entire field was. We had a Boros mid-range, a blue-white ephemerate, familiars deck, and then there was Rakdos combo deck. Was that Goblins? Yeah,
yeah,
Goblins.
Gabo Wombo or whatever they're calling it.
And then there was also like a black-red affinity, like that like mid-rangey deck with a bunch of like blood fountains and makeshift mutinitions and stuff like that.
Yep.
So yeah, what do you think about the meta overall, having played in it? Like, I can look at the numbers all day, but that doesn't necessarily tell the full story unless you're like keeping up with it live, you know?
Yeah, it felt pretty good. I know the results kind of look like a Sunday challenge on MTGO, but it just didn't quite feel that way in the tournament. My matches were over pretty quick, A, because I played Burn, and B, because I lost a couple of the games real quick. So when I wasn't just playing other decks in the tournament practice room, I was hopping in because they allowed, you had to allow watchers if you were playing in the tournament. So I hopped in and out of a few matches, and the game, I don't know if it was a mental thing because I knew it wasn't a challenge and I knew it wasn't this Wizards, sanctioned event and all this. It just felt different. The decks felt different to me. The games were at a different speed. They felt a little grindier than normal. I don't know if that, like I said, if that was just me or not. But some of the decks are stuff we don't normally see. This top, even if you go to the top 8 or whatever, it's not too drastically different from what's normally out there. But yeah, it just felt different. It looked different. It felt better, maybe because I recognize a lot of the names in the tournament. I'm not sure what it was, but what do you think about it, just kind of looking over it?
Yeah, so looking at it, I mean, obviously there was still a lot of different affinity decks. We were actually laughing because a lot of these decks are named different things, but like they're just affinity.
Right.
Something that I was really interested in is just going through all of the Burn list, because I know that you played Burn, and that was like what I recommended. There was another card, Valdaran Epicure, which is a 1/1 for red. When Valdaran Epicure enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, create a blood token. And to me, that card seems like interesting. Also, they played Kessig Flame Breather instead of Thermo Alchemist. They also played Reckless Impulse. This seems like another like list worth trying to me.
Sure. Yeah, I was actually looking at the Epicure card today. I was listening to another podcast and they mentioned it. And I know that we talked about it in the set review, and I was kind of high on it, but I hadn't even considered it in Burn. That seems like a pretty fun addition.
Absolutely, especially like if you start top decking lands like late game.
Right.
Just another thing to kind of help you keep cycling.
Yeah, so there was a lot more Burn than I expected. I think my final round was against MTG Brad for the mirror match. I think his very first round of the tournament was a mirror match with Burn. And just looking at it, I think if we go down to the actual meta share, Mono Red Burn, it's 15th out of 20th, and it did. The record for Mono Red Burn was 8 and 14 on the day. So that kind of tells you what you're looking at as far as the meta goes. But there was, it says 21% of the field. There were 7 decks in the top 33 that were Mono Red Burn. So it's a pretty hefty meta share, but it just couldn't keep up with the other decks that were out there.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, like it's one, I think, a challenging deck to play. 2, like it's oftentimes like a deck that can lose to itself.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe it wasn't the best choice for the tournament, especially given that like Boros Midrange and Azorius Control were so big.
Right.
In my experience, those are decks that can be pretty good against it, depending on exactly what those decks look like.
My results were a bit of variance, but a lot of, I think, poor mulligan decisions. Obviously, game 1 of the whole day was just a terrible decision to keep that hand against Boggles. But yeah, I'm not upset with it. The deck felt great. I think I would keep it outside of maybe adding Martyr of Ashes to the sideboard, which I should have done based on your list. I think I would keep it exactly the way it is now and run it back out there in a league maybe. With these, like you mentioned, we've already talked about a few times, heroic decks like that are running 17, 18 lands, it's always tricky to get a handle on those because variants can really sort of mess you up there. Like I've done it with heroics so many times where I'll have 18 lands to start with and then I get completely flooded out for like 3 whole matches in a row. I'm like, well, screw this. I'm taking out a land. And then I never see, the first 3 games I play, I see 1 land. It's like, how did that make a huge difference? Well, it doesn't really. You were just on the wrong side of that variance. You'd have to play 1,000,000 games for that 1 card to really make a huge percentile difference.
I don't know. I was pretty disappointed. I tried to make my schedule work in a way that I could make the tournament, but it just didn't end up working out. I'm glad that you had a good time. Everything that I saw on Twitter and on any other social medias, like I I saw, I think, one other Twitch streamer was streaming. I think it was Taigo Fugete.
Yeah.
I think he was actually playing the Ephemerate deck.
Yeah, he came in second place. Congrats.
Yeah, he was streaming it as well. And, it just looked like a ton of fun. Looked like something that was, like, ideal for people that are, like, wanting to get into content creation to play.
Yeah.
Just because there's, like, a very large audience for what this event was, which was, like, an international Pauper event.
Yeah, and the prizes, too. I don't know if we mentioned those. Those were awesome. The Liga Pauper Online, I think they run almost weekly events, at least once a month, maybe twice a month, tournaments on MTGO. And they usually give out 20, 30, 50 ticks sometimes. This one was huge. They gave away 100 MTGO ticks spread out over the top 5, I believe. And then the first place winner also got a playmat and a free entrance ticket into Paupergeddon in Milan, Italy 2022. So that is pretty sweet. Pretty sweet prize package for a free tournament.
Yeah, that is super sweet. To my knowledge, there is no listener Q&A this week because we forgot to send out a tweet.
Right. Pretty much.
Yeah. So I guess that's going to do it for this episode of Common Knowledge.
Yeah.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can find me on Twitter at JustGuyDad. Brad, where can they find you?
At Pauper_B on Twitter or BradDrackV on MTGO.
Or you can shoot us an email over at commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com. If you have any questions on the Pauper format, MTGO, or anything else, again, just please email us, leave a comment down below, reach out on Twitter. Thanks again to our sponsor, PureMTGO.com, as well as the Constructed Criticism Network for letting us be a part of it. And last, but certainly not least, thank you for listening. Take very good care of each other.
Never stop burning face.